Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar hosted by the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. My name is Alan Mankiewicz. I'm the Communications Coordinator at the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies, and I'll be moderating the webinar for today. I'll just start off by giving you some brief information about the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. We're a nonprofit, consumer-directed, and university-affiliated national organization. We're dedicated to research, education, and knowledge dissemination on issues facing people with disabilities, and we strive for full and equal participation of people with disabilities in all aspects of society, locally, provincially, territorially, nationally, and internationally. This webinar is part of CCDS's VisitAbility project. It's a 3-year national initiative that started in May 2013 and will run until March 2016. The goal of the initiative is to promote visitable housing across Canada. The objectives are to increase the understanding of visitable housing in terms of current policies and practices, impacts, barriers, and best practices, to increase the awareness of visitable housing, and to develop and implement strategies to promote visitable housing. In terms of the webinar today, I'll just give you some brief information. The target audience is for people who work with and for age-friendly communities across Canada. The objective is to inform age-friendly communities about visitable housing and share resources and strategies that can help promote visitability in their work. The length of the webinar will be 1 hour. We'll have 3 presentations followed by question and answer sessions with the presenters. This webinar will focus on very basic information about visitability. If you want more technical information or more policy-related information, we have other webinars available on our website, visitablehousingcanada.com. We have specific webinars that focus on construction issues related to visitable housing and policy development related to visitable housing. A couple technical things. The microphones will be muted for all participants. If you have a question or comment, please type it in the question box on the bottom of the control panel on your screen. Our 3 presenters today will be Youn-Young Park, Senior Researcher and Project Manager at the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies, Laurie, Ringaert, the Principal Consultant of Change Weavers Consulting, and Pat Harris, the Resource Centre Manager of Spinal Cord Injury BC, and they'll provide more detailed introductions of themselves when they present. Our first presenter today will be Youn-Young Park from the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. Go ahead when you're ready.
Hello, and the term VisitAble is a combination of 2 words, visit and able. And VisitAble housing is an innovative housing concept which is well established and practiced in many parts of Europe and the United States, but the concept is very new to many Canadians. VisitAble homes have 3 basic accessibility features on the main level. 1, no step entrance from the street to the home. 2, wide doorways and clear passage on the main floor. And 3, wheelchair accessible washroom or bathroom on the main floor. No step entrance through the main entrance is most desirable, but no step entrance can be made at the front, back, or side of the house. And these photos show no step entrance at the front of single-family homes. And you can see no step entrance can be made for a townhouse as well. Another photo of a townhouse with no step entrance at the front. And this is another townhouse. No step entrance through side of the house, back of the house, and through the attached garage door. And wide doorways and the passage on the main floor, and wheelchair accessible washroom on the main floor. for people who use mobility devices. We promote VisitAble housing as a default home design for everyone. Our vision with VisitAble housing is to create inclusive communities where everyone lives with basic accessibility in their homes, and also where people with mobility challenges can visit their families, friends, and neighbors without physical barriers. In most cases, VisitAble features can be easily incorporated when building new homes for little additional costs. For home retrofits, however, you probably need to consider more advanced accessibility features than these three VisitAbility features to better meet the residents' accessibility needs or lifestyle. VisitAble housing is particularly relevant to age-friendly communities. First, aging in place. The research shows the vast majority of adults aged 55 or older like to remain in their home as they grow older. And 1/3 of all Canadians aged 55 years or older have mobility challenges. And older adults are less likely to move to an institution or care home when their homes have basic accessibility features. And home accessibility also affects older adults' social isolation. And some of the major reasons that older adults cited for their wanting to age in place include a sense of independence and control, and proximity to their families, friends, and neighbors, and familiarity. Stairs are a major cause of falls and injuries for older adults, and research shows stairs are the leading cause of serious falls among older adults who live in the community, accounting for about 1/3 of all fatal falls. And staircases are one of the common areas within the home where falls occur. Over 50% of falls that older adults suffer take place in their own homes. And a large portion of Canadian older adults are hospitalized after a fall on stairs or steps in their homes. So it is not surprising when older adults downsize, many of them actually look for a bungalow or a home with fewer stairs. The reality is there is a lack of housing stock with basic accessibility in Canada, and this is problematic to the growing aging population in Canada and also people with mobility challenges. The lack of accessible housing fails to address the changing accessibility needs of different families and residents who live in the house over the lifetime of the house. And I understand that the lack of affordable and accessible housing is one of the major issues that many age-friendly communities are grappling with. Many people wonder about costs associated with VisitAble housing. When VisitAbility features are planned for at the outset of building a home, additional costs can be negligible. And retrofits of a conventional home to make it a VisitAble home cost significantly more than building a VisitAble home. And most of additional costs is related to creating the no-step entrance rather than the interior design. So additional costs associated with VisitAble housing vary, and some studies suggest additional costs for VisitAble housing can be as little as $25, and some suggest mostly less than $1,000. But when we think about all the studies together, in most studies, costs are less than $5,000 for sure, including our own case study of Bridgewater neighborhoods in Winnipeg. A number of factors can affect costs related to VisitAble housing. Some of the major factors include lot grading and conditions of the house to make a no-step entrance, and also whether to use a ramp or lot grading to make a no-step entrance, and conditions of a basement, such as whether or not to have a basement, and if you have a basement, then whether or not to use window wells, and depths of a basement, and foundation walls, and so on. In terms of policies, several parts of Canada have already introduced VisitAble housing in their policies. For example, in 2015, Beecher Bay First Nation, which is located in Vancouver Island, British Columbia, they introduced a new housing policy that mandates all three VisitAbility features for all newly built residential and non-residential buildings to be built in the community in the future. And in 2014, the City of Vancouver amended their building bylaw to mandate some accessibility features for all newly built residential buildings, including condos and apartments and so on. And among those mandated accessibilities and wide doorways and stairs and hallways on the main floor and wheelchair accessible washroom or bathroom are included. In 2003, a small municipality, Saanich, located in Vancouver Island, they introduced a zoning bylaw that mandates all three VisitAbility features for high-rise multifamily residential buildings with elevators, such as apartments and condos and so on. For single-family homes or townhouses that do not have an elevator, for example, VisitAbility is voluntary. In Manitoba, in 2010, the City of Winnipeg included VisitAble housing in its accessibility design standards. And also, the province of Manitoba provided VisitAble housing guidelines for home builders to follow when they build VisitAble homes. The City of Ottawa also included VisitAble housing in their accessibility design standards in 2015. The city also developed 4 recent social housing projects to be 100% visitable or mostly visitable with some accessible units. So these are the policies, but one of the Canadian best practices that promote visitable housing is an initiative called Measuring Up Donors. So this is the initiative that Laurie and Pat will talk about a bit later. Another Canadian best practice is the Bridgewater project in Winnipeg, Manitoba. That project is a housing development project that was initiated by the province of Manitoba in 2016, and it is planned to be completed by 2021. That project is the very first neighborhood in Canada that includes a large portion of housing to be built as visitable. So according to the plan, over 1,000 single-family homes will be built with visitability features in the Bridgewater neighborhood. And I understand some of their units of their multifamily, like condos, will include visitability as well. This map is a development plan of the Bridgewater neighborhood. So you see the red parts. The red parts indicate visitable streets where visitable homes are to be built. and several hundred VisitAble homes have been built and occupied already in the neighborhoods. What's unique about the Bridgewater neighborhood is that no step entrance of all the VisitAble homes in the area is through the main front entrance. And also, the no-step entrance of those VisitAble homes are made using lot grading rather than using a ramp. So I would like to show you some photos of VisitAble homes in this neighborhood. So this is one house in the neighborhood. As you can see, there is no stairs in the front. This is another example, a small VisitAble house. This is another photo. And again, this is another VisitAble home. This home is built with walkout design. This is the front of the house, and this is the back of the house. And then this photo shows the VisitAble street, so where all these houses are built VisitAble. Now, I would like to have Pat and Laurie talk about their initiative measuring up the north. And after that, I will share the resources that we have developed and also some recommendations for age-friendly communities. Okay. Just give us a minute, please. Okay, Pat.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Okay. I can't see the PowerPoint.
Okay, hold on, please. Okay, just give us a second.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah, let me just go back. And go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for giving Laurie and I the opportunity to speak about a project that happened here in northern BC between 2007 and 2009. It was called Measuring Up the North. And so, next slide. That's me. I've been living and working in northern BC since 1981, and with Spinal Cord Injury BC, and have been involved in, accessibility advisory committees in various northern communities, and really trying to focus on some community development and push initiatives like accessibility and inclusion forward in the north. Next slide. And Laurie will also be speaking. She's currently the principal consultant with Change Weavers Consulting, and she was our project director for Measuring Up the North. Next. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through this first part fairly quickly so we can get to the VisitAble Housing segment of what we did with the project. But so we're going to talk a little bit about what we did between 2007 and 2009, what's happened since the project wrapped up, the lessons we learned from this, and possibly some next steps. Next. So what we did. Next. So the Measuring Up the North project was an initiative that preceded the 2010 Winter and Paralympic Games in Vancouver. And the project focused on really engaging northern BC communities to determine the extent to which they were accessible and inclusive. So a partnership was formed by the North Central Local Government Association and Spinal Cord Injury BC to push this project forward. Next. As I say, the partners were the North Central Local Government Association, and that's the umbrella group for local government in northern BC. It's made up of elected officials, and this association puts forward resolutions on issues that are important to northern and rural communities. Our supporting partners were BC Healthy Communities, Legacies Now, the Northern Health Authority, and the BC Ministry of Healthy Living and Sport. And representatives from these agencies were on our steering committee and helped inform us and the staff on moving the project forward. Next. So the staff employed were myself, Maxine Copey, who was the executive director of NCLGA, and Laurie Ringaert, who was the project director. Next. Here you can see in this slide sort of the scope of, well, the geographic scope anyway. There's 41 or 42 northern communities that were involved in this project, and geographically, you know, covered 70% of the province. Next. We use the community participatory action approach, and so basically, I mean, what we really wanted to do was to ensure that the communities themselves identified the issues that were important to them. So we gave them lots of information. We had resources and tools and education, but we really wanted the communities to look at what their issues were in their towns and cities. Next. So the process was to develop local advisory committees and made up of a project liaison, and that was typically would be an elected official. The community project liaison would be a person with a disability or a senior, and local committees would be formed to push the project forward. Next. So what did we do as staff, and how did we support the communities? Well, we did that by providing education, coaching, networking opportunities. We did a lot of site visits, a lot of traveling throughout northern BC, and let the people know about funding sources so that they could apply for funding to do some of the projects that they identified. It's really interesting about the education piece. When we started this, there were some communities that at first, you know, they got some money and threw in a couple of curb cuts and said, hey, we're done. And we kind of went back to it and said, no, you're not really done yet. There's more to accessibility and inclusion, like, and we encourage people to look at their accessible transportation or housing, access to services and other infrastructure and programs that include people with disabilities and seniors. So next slide. So yeah, so I'm going to turn it over to Laurie now, and she can speak to the VisitAble Housing part of the project.
Thank you, Pat. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a pleasure for me to be speaking today about our Measuring Up the North project and also about VisitAble Housing. So next slide. So one of the things about our Measuring Up the North project was that VisitAble Housing had a very important role. We were looking at a number of areas with Measuring Up the North in public spaces, as Pat said, inclusion into programs, a number of areas, but VisitAble Housing was a key thing that we brought to the project. And when Pat was talking about education, a lot of the communities had not heard of VisitAble Housing. So that was a big effort that we made to bring that to the table and start educating the planners, the community representatives, the elected officials. Next slide. So, you know, when I think about VisitAble Housing, I really think about it as it's really about changing culture. And so we had to change, and we're still changing. It's not all changed for sure, but it's changing the way people think. And I think all of you that are involved in VisitAble Housing would agree with me that that's really what it's about, is changing the way we do things, how we think about things. So changing that culture is huge. Next slide. So we took a number of approaches. As Pat was saying, we had these champions that were in each community that they were designated as the leaders for their community. We did these educational events with them and ongoing peer support around VisitAble Housing, and even coming out to those site visits and talking about VisitAble Housing on the ground. Pat and I met with the Home Builders Association in the north, and one of the home builders there actually got on board with it at that time. A big piece that we felt was really important for sustainability was to encourage change to policies. We really wanted to drive that, to change policies at the local levels in their official community plans. And you'll see later when Pat talks about what we did find that's happened since, that in fact that did happen. So our encouragement actually worked. We worked with some of our provincial partners, and we were part of developing a planning guide that went provincial and still being used on how to design age-friendly, disability-friendly communities and put that into your official community plan. The NCLGA, they have a lot of power and proposed incentives at their annual general meeting on one of the years. And one of the things about this kind of initiative is always to elevate success so that people keep on moving forward. So the newsletter with the NCLGA, they would elevate any success to do with Measuring Up the North. So if VisitAble Housing came through, that would be elevated as well. And that's very important to keep people and organizations motivated. And then I want to talk about, we hosted a major conference, a provincial conference in 2009 that the prime focus was on VisitAble Housing. Next slide. So this was, the conference was on the broader, looking at the community broader in terms of universal design, but we had a very special focus on VisitAble Housing. We invited Eleanor Smith, as many of you know, from Concrete Change, who I feel is the founder of VisitAble Housing in North America. She came and spoke. Mayor Claire from Bolingbrook, Illinois. We invited him. He was unable to come, but he sent a very good video and really convinced people about the ease of VisitAble Housing and the importance of it. Winton Global was the home builder that had taken the idea of VisitAble Housing into their own manufacturing, and they're a local modular home builder in the north, and they actually hosted tours of their plant during this time. We had a realtor that did a presentation, a builder who was building VisitAble Housing on Vancouver Island, and then Jake Pauls, who's a well-known expert on stairway design and issues on stairways, and he spoke. We also, at the conference, created the visitable house. It's called the Prince George Visitable Housing Declaration, and we felt that the communities could use that as sort of a power tool to take to their communities to say, hey, this was declared at our conference, and we want to make sure this goes forth. So next slide. So as I said, there was these two tools that were produced, and that Planning for the Future guide is still available, as I said, and you can look in the British Columbia, Government of British Columbia website for it. Next slide. So what happened between 2009 and 2011? I'll just talk about some evaluation work that that I did there after we completed the project. Next slide. So it's always good in any of these initiatives to go back and evaluate what's happened since. So I was able to convince the NCLGA to fund me to come in and do some evaluation work. And I created a survey at that time and found that we had 15 of the 40 communities actually respond to that survey at that time. And 6 of them had indicated that they had some focus on visitable housing. Some of the comments that they said, our new BC housing project is just steps away from being completed with 10 new houses. Some of them talked about having limited resources to move forward. There was a period of time in BC after the Olympics where there wasn't a whole bunch of extra money for building and all sorts of things. There was this money happening before the Olympics, and then it kind of dried up. And then people talked about putting visitable housing into their OCPs. Next slide. And in 2011, a big achievement was that Winton Global had actually developed a web page on visitable housing on their as a home builder. And Prince George became the first northern community in BC to pass a visitable housing policy and bylaw, March 28, 2011. It didn't encompass all of the features that we would want, but it was definitely a start. Next slide. And some of the key challenges that they expressed at that time is that they felt that they had lost that backbone support that Measuring Up the North was offering centrally, as well as from the NCLGA, and that there was, as I mentioned before, there was a drying up of funding to support the efforts to move forward. Next slide. So now I'm going to send it over to Pat to talk about what's happened since 2011.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So I'm going to start with sort of what's happened, on a provincial level. And so just recently, well, in the past year, the province of BC initiated a 10-year action plan entitled Accessibility 2024. And you can go to the Accessibility 2024 website and get more information on this. But essentially, Accessibility 2024 proposes outcomes and measurements that will increase accessibility in BC. The province of BC wants to make BC the most accessible province in Canada by 2024. So it created a parliamentary secretary and an accessibility secretariat to move this initiative along. Next slide. So here's there's a document that they developed, a white paper on Accessibility 2024, and you can go to the website and have a look at that. But So they've completed a checklist to make existing housing more accessible. Right now in progress, they want to introduce a measure requiring the percentage of all new homes to be constructed to include adaptability and accessibility, and explore options for a housing registry in BC. We're hoping to see some more funding around this project for age-friendly community projects. Next slide. They produced a report on official community plans, and so a number of at least communities in the north have referenced visitable housing or adaptable housing, or increasing housing for seniors in their official community plans. You know, some of the communities involved would be Prince George, Fort St. John, Quesnel, Mackenzie, 100 Mile House, Terrace, Kitimat, and Telkwa. These are some of the communities that have referenced something to do with visitable housing or adaptable housing in their official community plans. Next. Next. So locally, Laurie mentioned the city of, well, this is a new initiative for Prince George. They're developing a multifamily and seniors housing incentive program. And they're just developing this program now. So what they're trying to do is encourage builders to build accessible accommodation by providing multi-year tax exemptions and the reductions for development costs. So not really sure how this is going to work out, but we're encouraged by this. The City of Prince George did produce a visible housing project report. It was quite extensive, and they developed guidelines for builders. However, the use of the guidelines is voluntary. Next. Some of the communities that have referenced visitability in their official community plans is Tumbler Ridge. Next. The City of Terrace. Next. City of Terrace is to ensure new housing units are visitable through a review of the bylaw regulations and provision of incentives. Next. Kitimat. Next. So what progress has been made? Well, that is a good question. We don't know the extent to which visitable housing has been built across the north. We know that there's been a lot of talk. We know that people have referenced visitable housing in official community plans. I will say in Prince George, since the visitable housing bylaw was developed back a couple of years ago, to my knowledge, no visitable housing has been built. So we don't really know the extent, and you know, some kind of evaluation or follow-up is required. Next. So, what were some of our successes? Well, there were some changes made to policies and bylaws that we know of. The culture, changes were made to the culture. I will say that Spinal Cord Injury BC has been involved subsequent at all of the annual general meetings of the local government association since this project, and we speak to many of the elected officials, councillors, they're all very well aware of the need for accessibility and inclusion and visitable housing. And so it's part of the conversation. And so we're pleased that it's still on the minds of elected officials. Next.
Do you want me to add to that?
Sure, go ahead.
So I think there was quite a few lessons learned from our project. You know, the main thing is that the idea of backbone support is critical for to make sure things really roll on these kind of projects. Funding is key. It's really important that you get your visitable housing into policy, and it should be law. I mean, Pat and I both feel that you need to have that kind of teeth. You can't just be voluntary, as Pat said, or it's not going to happen. So putting it into the official community plans, I've seen the evidence that was in there is really good. But we should see thou shall, not should, in those kind of things. Incentives, they do have a place and they work to a certain extent, and voluntary doesn't go too far. But one of the big things is really to have this ongoing evaluation feedback is really important. Next slide. So I guess some of the next steps, Pat, you and I can chat here together. It would be great if we could find some funding to do an evaluation of what's happened with visitable housing, you know, since the last time we did the evaluation. And Pat, maybe you want to talk more about other things.
Right. Well, you know, it's a tough one. I think that, you know, we got a lot of work done through the project and engaged a lot of the communities. It was important to have staff on the ground that directed this project, and basically, you know, you've got to have your foot on the throttle all the time, or else to keep the agenda moving. And I think we all know that. That's not news. But what happens is, you know, when funding dries up, the communities have, particularly northern and rural communities, have a small tax base, and so there's not a lot of money for infrastructure and that sort of thing. And so some kind of incentive, funding incentive for small communities is really, really important. Communities are always looking for money. So, I mean, we're hoping that through the Accessibility 2024 initiative of the provincial government that we can continue to move some of this stuff forward.
Well, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I think that's all we have to say, right, Pat? And we look forward to any questions.
Okay, thanks, Laurie and Pat. Before we proceed to the Q&A session, Youn-Young just has a few more remarks.
I would like to share some of the resources that we have developed on VisitAble Housing with you, and then share some recommendations that we have for age-friendly communities. In our VisitAbility project, we have developed a number of information resources, and all of you are welcome to use all the resources that we have developed for your work. So to show you some of our resources, the first one is a 3-minute promotional video on VisitAble Housing, and we think this is a great resource that provides a good introduction on VisitAble Housing. So if you want to share information about VisitAble Housing with your stakeholders in a timely manner, this would be like a great resource. A brochure on VisitAble Housing, a fact sheet on VisitAble Housing in general, fact sheet on costs related to VisitAble housing, guidelines for VisitAble housing measurement. So this is the resource that provides very specific construction measurements for home builders who are interested in building VisitAble homes. And the other resources that we have include a webinar on building VisitAble homes. This webinar addresses specific construction issues related to building VisitAble homes, and a webinar on policy development for VisitAble housing for policymakers, a photo gallery, PowerPoint presentation on VisitAble housing, and research reports on VisitAble housing, and there are many more. All of these resources are available at visitablehousingcanada.com, and you can download these resources for free. So to download those resources, to click the link on this slide, or you may request resources to us, such as paper copies of resources like a fact sheet, brochures, and so on, or electronic copies of the promotional video or webinars. So to request resources, please contact VisitAbility at disabilitystudies.ca, and we will receive requests for paper copies of resources only by November 30th this year. And we also have a Facebook called Support VisitAble Housing in Canada, and we update a lot of information about VisitAble Housing on the Facebook on a regular basis. There are many ways that age-friendly communities can promote VisitAble housing in their communities, and we would like to share some recommendations that we have for age-friendly communities. First of all, many housing professionals are reluctant to adopt VisitAble housing in their practice, thinking that there is no market demand for VisitAble housing. So, ask for it. Demand for VisitAble homes to housing professionals, such as developers, builders, architects, realtors, and so on. And share the information resources about VisitAble housing with housing professionals in your region. And provide home builders who are not familiar with building VisitAble homes with the guidelines for VisitAble housing measurements that we just introduced. And also encourage builders to build show homes of VisitAble housing. Local and provincial territorial governments can be key partners for your work, and encourage the governments to develop policies that promote VisitAble housing, such as building bylaws, zoning bylaws, standards, guidelines, and so on, and include VisitAbility in publicly funded housing development project, and encourage them to provide subsidies and support for VisitAble housing. Most importantly, let people know about VisitAble housing. So when we talk to people about VisitAble housing, we don't need to persuade them or explain much. They just get it. It just makes a lot of sense. So many people don't demand or look for VisitAble housing just because they are not aware of that. So include VisitAbility in your information material on housing options for older adults, and launch an awareness campaign on VisitAble housing, forum, workshop, whatever. And also showcase exemplary VisitAble homes in your community. And some of you asked about funding related to VisitAble housing. The federal government provides funding called Enabling Accessibility Fund. And this fund provides funding for projects that improve accessibility in communities. So if you are interested in promoting VisitAble housing in your communities, this might be a great resource. So to get more information about the fund, please click the link on this slide. Now, in our VisitAbility project, we have established 6 task forces across Canada. And they include the British Columbia First Nations Task Force, and Richmond Task Force in British Columbia, Edmonton Task Force in Alberta, Winnipeg Task Force in Manitoba, Ottawa Task Force, and Kitchener-Waterloo Task Force in Ontario. The contact information here, they are the task force coordinators. So the task forces in our project are the very knowledgeable and resourceful about VisitAble Housing. They will be great partners and resources for those of you who are interested in promoting VisitAble Housing in your communities. We strongly encourage you to contact them for more information about VisitAble Housing or work with them. Okay, so now
we're going to take the time that we have left to answer any questions. Just a reminder to please type your questions in the chat box, and then we'll direct your question to the presenters. Looks like we have a few questions already.
okay. Okay. Okay.
One of the questions we got was, how can VisitAble Housing be included in official community plans if most provincial codes exempt homes from barrier-free design requirements? Would that violate a provincial code to include it in the community plan? Laurie, do you want to maybe respond to that one?
Okay, thanks. So one thing about I would say that when a local government is doing their official community plans, they can go beyond the provincial code as long as they don't go below the provincial code. So they can be more creative than the provincial code. So I would say that's what's happened in British Columbia with a lot of the kind of things that you're seeing there. I don't know, Pat, if you have any.
Yeah, well, one of the things that comes up in the conversation regularly is the fact that the building codes, at least in BC, haven't really been updated significantly to include accessibility. You know, we see more people using scooters and bigger power mobility, and you know, I mean, the building code hasn't kept up. And so part of this Accessibility 2024 initiative and the white paper that was developed, updating the building codes is a huge goal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. One other suggestion we had, someone suggested that Laurie and Pat might want to look at partnering with the university to help conduct the evaluation. So that was just a suggestion.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Yes.
We have some questions about whether the webinar will be made available online. So it will be made available on our website, probably within the next day or two. And we'll post it on our Facebook page as well, so people can look for that. And if anyone has any other questions, feel free to type it in the chat box.
Okay, hold on. Okay. So Roger is in the audience, and he has some understanding about building code and VisitAbility. Roger, you are unmuted. Would you like to talk a little bit about VisitAble Housing and building codes?
Yes, that's actually why I asked the question about the official community plan, given that most code, whether it be the National Building Code or provincial codes, seem to exempt most dwellings from barrier-free design. So that was the reason why I asked that question. So I find it interesting that either the official plans or the official community plans do have some flexibility there. So that's a positive thought there. Regarding visitability for dwellings, Dr. Park and I had mentioned that I might be able to discuss my code change requests with the National Building Code. And so I just want to mention to those in the audience that code change request number 964 with the National Building Code proposes visitability for new dwellings. The committee meetings are supposed to be starting sometime in November. They're just putting together the executive committee, which will be the first one to be reviewing it. And if anyone would like to be included on the email list for any updates that I get from the committees, I would certainly be willing to include you in a group email. So you can certainly reach me with the contact information that's in the webinar information, or by Gmail, which is also on the website under the task forces.
And to let the audience know that Roger is the coordinator of Ottawa Task Force. Okay, thank you, Roger.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions?
If we didn't get to your question, or if you need further information, feel free to email us at visitability@disabilitystudies.ca, and we'd be happy to forward you any information that you might be looking for.
So in addition to those resources that we would like to make available for all of you, if any of you are wondering how you can start promoting VisitAble housing in your communities, like where to start, who to contact, and so on, we encourage you to contact the task force in your region, or please feel free to contact us directly at VisitAbility@disability.ca or the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies.
Okay, just a couple things in closing. Once you close your webinar window, you will be prompted to fill out a feedback survey. If you want copies of the presentations you saw today, you'll automatically receive one if you fill out your survey and provide your email address. And again, the address of our website to find all these resources is visitablehousingcanada.com. Thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.